All righty. Well, good evening, everybody. It's okay. I'll give you all the post-eating prayer. Lord, bless this food for the nourishment of our bodies and the hands that have made it. Lord, thank you for the gifts you continue to give us. In Jesus' nice name, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. Sorry. Even I stumble over it. It's fun. So y'all know I was trying very hard to get Crippen to come in for us, and unfortunately we just work it out. So what I'm going to do is to present from a point of view of the times that I have been involved with funeral homes. I've also got some material and information about some local funeral homes around here. I'm not discounting Crippen. I don't know if any of y'all know, they got bought by a Canadian company on February 20th of this year. And so they are so busy right now with trying to redo. They are now bought by the largest crematorium and funeral homes company in North America. So it's a very large deal. They basically bought up both of their locations, the cemetery, all of it. And so they just really couldn't get here. So
what company is it that bought them? Do you know?
I have it, and I don't have it on my head right now. Yeah. So anyway, they were real busy. I actually got a hold of Brown, that is out of Grand Junction, and I was quite surprised with them and their website because it lists everything. And so when you're really starting to think about and wanting to think about funeral services and planning and that sort of thing, their site had a lot of information. So I'm going to share that with y'all tonight so that you can see that. And then I'd really like to see and share with each other just kind of some of the things that we've been through before. So everything from I've had private cemetery plots that were created on private land to distribution of ashes. I've also got a special little presentation about our own columbarium. Thank you. Got the right word. Mine just. So just want to share this with you guys and all the information that we have, and I'm going to go ahead and get started with that. So, and I did a couple of things with this one. So this is Brown's straight up price list. And I did talk with them. They do indeed will service here in Ouray. They're mostly up in Grand Junction, Mesa County area, but they will come to here as well. Also, in doing research for cremations, this company right now is the lowest price cremation service in the area that I've been able to find. $14.95 is the okay, just one. $14.95, and it's in here. It is the price that they have for just the basic cremation service, and it tells you exactly what's involved, what's not involved. So basically, from that price, they will go to the hospital or to your home to pick up your loved one. They will take them to the facilities where they will then work on the body and prepare them for the funeral service, whatever it may be. Can mean if it's less than 4 days, then you don't have to have the body embalmed. They keep the body in the refrigerator. If it goes longer than 4 days, then that conversation comes into play. And this is Colorado law. It's not something that they just make up. So they're not trying to say, hey, we're just going to charge them, make you do it because we want to. No, they're going to do it because that's what Colorado law is. So also on the back, I thought I had put it on here. I'm taking you around here. I added a couple of things here as well. So it's not the very last page, but just inside from it says choose the type of service you want. Okay. This was their checklist, if you will, of what you need to think about if you're trying to plan or pre-plan a funeral service. Okay, so they were trying to make sure that the questions that we've kind of all been wrestling with already, the things that we've talked about over the last few weeks, they also have their list of things that they want you to be thinking about as you start to talk about that. Also, it's not in here, but they also talk about both pre-planned and prepaid funeral services. I've had both situations set up. And the one thing that a prepaid program works out to is it's basically an insurance policy that you basically buy into. That insurance policy then keeps valid for the time until the person does pass, and then they can get the money out of that very quickly to pay the funeral expenses and everything else. It also will lock in that price that you're paying today. So let's say, for example, when my mother passed, they had $3,500 funeral expense already bought. And they had bought it a decade ago. And so that was locked in at what they figured would be to do her service the way she wanted it, a cremation service with an actual in-person service that was held in the funeral home's parlor. And then that locked that price in for that time. So even though it had been there for a decade, that was the price she was paying from when she locked it in with that prepaid policy. Now, the Dave Ramsey guy in me would say, don't buy into that because you don't get any interest, you don't get any kind of other expense or anything else like that. So if you put $5,000 away into a CD or some other investment account, that money would most likely be available for you with way more money than what you had in there. But it does not lock in the price with that funeral home. So that's the part of it. Please, absolutely. Yeah.
In our town in Nebraska, where we lived before we came here, there was a family-owned funeral home that was really, really wonderful. And so a lot of people bought prepaid plans, and it got sold out. And the funerals ended up being terrible, and you know what I mean? So you have to be aware, make sure you're with a very reputable, but it was the one around the corner from us, and whoever was doing the makeup on the, anyway, so just be aware of that. Make sure if you're locking it in, you're with a place that would be a good one, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So again,
if you're just doing, for instance, if you're just doing cremation,
yeah,
but if there's, you know,
right.
that maybe is something to consider.
Absolutely.
Versus,
Absolutely.
the whole shebang.
Well, and again, this is all about how much we're helping our loved ones not have to deal with this, right? This is the same thing we talked about in funeral planning for the church, the funeral plan for what you're going to have to do with the rest of it, as far as the funeral home and what they're going to do and what you're going to need to do. This really kind of covers a lot of that information in there so that you have it and you kind of know what those things are. Now, I think they mentioned in here somewhere, but you know that caskets can go anywhere from a few $100s all the way up to $20,000 just on the casket. Okay? I again remind you, if you're having your service in the Episcopal Church, I'm going to cover it the moment you walk in the door. Okay? We're going to put a pall on it. You're not going to see the casket anyway. You buy a beautiful urn.
1,000 or 200.
That's right. We are all the same before God. If you buy a big, expensive urn, again, you have to think about where it's going to be. Are you going to put it on your mantle, or are you going to actually put it in a niche? Are you going to put it in a columbarium, or are you going to bury it in the ground? All of these things are plausible, or if you're just going to get the ashes and spread them somewhere. Again, all these things are plausible. It's just something you need to think about when you're planning and talking to funeral homes, especially if you're talking about a pre-planned service sort of thing.
And Mark, I have another quick
Please,
comment.
absolutely.
My
I want
grandmother
comments.
lived to be 103. So my grandmother lived to be 103, and she wanted to be cremated. And so we're up, and it was a good funeral home up in Grand Junction. But they took us into the casket room, and I was kind of like, and they weren't showing us the 20 grand one, but it was like, you know, thousands. And I was like, wait a minute. And they were like, and we'll get her cat. And I said, aren't we just having this go into the, you know, in the chute? You know, burn it up. Well, anyway, and so I jokingly said, which was in poor taste, I realized, I said, Grandma really just needs a refrigerator box, doesn't she? You know, Grandma would have thought that was funny. Anyway, and then she goes, oh, well, we can do that. By law, she had to say. So she takes me around this partition. It was Mom that I was here. She takes me around this partition, and there was this box. It cost us $5. Now, when my dad, it was basically a When my dad got cremated a year ago, it had gone up to 75. I think they realized there were people like me, But anyway, they were they were not on a hard sale, but they were trying to sell us a casket to go into the cremated. So
Yeah.
You didn't need the casket, she's in the door of the car, no?
Oh, I just want all her ashes.
Oh,
She traveled with me for a long time.
Oh, yeah. And thank you again.
Yeah.
Again, you will see things like that, and especially when we start talking about the cremation service, non-ceremonial cremation service. That was the fourth. It's on page 4. I apologize. Page 4. Non-ceremonial cremation is $14.95, and they give you the option of bringing your own container for the ashes, or you can buy the basic container from them. $75, which seems like a lot for a little plastic box, but that's what it is. The ashes get put into a plastic bag. The bag gets sealed with a tag that helps identify the ashes with whom it belongs to, and then it's in a plastic box, basically. It's a little big. I'm trying to think of the size of it. It's not huge. Well, so this is, not this big. So this is probably, you brought about half the size of this. So that would be the plastic container for the ashes. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So they will, yeah.
So
And-
we provide it in their 4 kits,
Yeah.
and we all have somewhere different.
Yep.
Spreading them.
Yeah. So I'll tell you the absolute truth. My mother, after she was cremated, my father got the ashes. He came to me. We met in a parking lot in a grocery store. I had gone into Walmart and bought a little flower container thingy, basically, that's sealed and locked, and I put half of the bag of ashes in my container, left the rest with my father, and I've been spreading her ashes kind of around ever since then. So ultimately, her goal was to be spread, her ashes to be spread in Cozumel. I think I mentioned that before. When you're thinking about your plans, make sure you have money for the people that are going to have to take your ashes somewhere to do it, okay? I have just not made it to Cozumel yet. I've got to work it, exactly. So again, there's a ton of options, and all of these things, of course, they just cost money. And so if you're looking at the possibility of, wanting the casket, another thing that I don't know if we talked about it or not, but we don't generally do viewings in the Episcopal Church. And so in many cases, I've talked to family members, and if they were already kind of planning on really wanting that viewing, on occasion I've said, why don't you do the viewing at the funeral home, and then we'll do the service here at the church. That's a very viable thing. And the funeral home doesn't seem to have as much a problem playing whatever music you want, whatever pictures you want to put up on the wall or anything like that. A lot of times, and I think they have it in here as well, where they'll have to do a video that can play in the background while you're having the service with them and everything. Generally in the church, what we do is that if that was something that somebody wanted, I would put it up out here in the parish hall for a reception after the service. And then that way people could have pictures of folks that are there, their family and their loved ones and everything else as they're having reception afterwards. So we try to stay a little bit more traditional. Funerals and weddings are ones where we have a little bit more leeway in what we do and don't do in the services, that sort of thing. But we just want to make sure it's respectful and mindful of our tradition of the Episcopal Church. So again, if someone came to me and said, I really want to have an open casket, I'd say we don't do that in the Episcopal Church. But if you want to have a viewing before the service, we might be able to set something up. The moment the casket goes into the sanctuary for the actual funeral service, it gets closed. Pall gets put on, and it doesn't get removed or opened again until we're gone. I've had one family, Yeah, go ahead.
What's the witness thing?
So my understanding of that is that they always have someone there to witness the actual cremation of the person that you're sending, basically. So they're not going to just basically send them off to the crematory, and they're going to guarantee, they're going to basically say, well, the crematory is going to take care of this and everything else. This, they actually have someone that accompanies the body to make sure that it's the right body going to the right cremation, and you're receiving the ashes out.
There's been some problems with some funeral
Up in the
north of here.
yes.
And so,
Yeah. She's in federal prison now.
Yeah.
And her mother is.
yeah. So, Yeah, and then there's even there's one on here on page 5 that talks about immediate burial, which they have requirements of trying to get them done quickly, but the state also has to have their paperwork and everything else done. So they try to do it rapidly, but they have to secure the necessary legal permits and everything else to be able to do it. Yes.
Isn't in the Jewish faith by sundown?
Yeah, they try to do that.
The next day?
Yeah. Yeah.
We can't.
Yeah, Muslim is us as well. Again, they try, but there's so many things that go into this. Okay, let's say, okay, you're not gonna have a service. You're just gonna bury them. Okay, they still have to get everything worked out with the cemetery. They still have to get the ground opened or whatever to that effect. And I don't know if Jewish. I have to find out whether they do cremations or not. So that's a good
I
question.
don't know, I know they what?
I don't know if Jewish folks do cremations or not. So if that would meet the requirement. Yeah.
I think, although at least in Denver,
Yeah.
there's special mortuaries that
Yeah.
that do
Designed for
Jewish
that.
services.
Okay, yeah. So that's one I just haven't come across yet, basically, but that's but yeah, so again, it's there, everything they have that you can do it. It's just there's a dollar amount attached to it, right?
You know, one of, sorry.
No, please.
Just having done this.
Yeah.
We were surprised at how long it took, because my dad's service was, about 12 days after he passed away, and they weren't sure that they could get us the ashes in time.
Yeah.
So often you
Oh.
don't have the ashes in time for a service if you're, and you know, that could have been, it wasn't a great, company that did it. I would not recommend it to anybody, but still, you do have to take it into account that there may be an empty box.
Yeah.
They said, oh, we'll give you an empty box.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, but they did.
Yeah.
They
And I
got it to
have-
us day before.
I have done that several occasions. I've done funerals or memorial services like that. And when someone really wanted something there, we did. We just put an empty box. We put the pall over it. It didn't look any different than what it looked like if the ashes were actually there. And then, we'll do the interment when they actually get the ashes. I had one gentleman that donated his body to medical science, and so it was 6 months before we actually got his remains back. It's just, that's the way it worked. And so, but the interesting thing with Al, when they did it, I think he donated it to like one of the medical schools. They actually did the cremation for him and sent the ashes back, so he didn't have to actually do that. That, in many cases, is a way to get low or no cost funerals. Yes, sir.
So is there any VA benefits with cremation?
Yes, there are. I'll talk about that. That's on my back page for you. So yes, there are these options.
Out of curiosity, is there a pall around here like what you put over a casket or?
We have a pall. It's actually incorrect because it's purple. All funeral services are an Easter service, and so they're all supposed to be white. And so everything that you have, so like when we had Carolyn's service, I did cover her urn with the pall that we'd normally cover the chalice with. And so that worked. That's not exactly the right thing, but at least I was able to do a white covering. So we needed to get a new pall for the casket and the other.
Yeah, speaking of military, my father was a World War II veteran, and they got in touch with us, and they fired off the artillery.
21 rounds.
Artillery. And
Oh,
they gave us a very beautiful flag, which they called it so beautifully.
Yeah.
And then the shirts.
So the 21 gun salute, that's the volleys, yeah. They played taps, yeah.
Yes.
So the military honor guard, and most areas do have them. They're usually volunteers, unless you're really close to a base, and then sometimes they're soldiers from the base, that sort of thing. They try to match the service if they can, but most of them that I've experienced have kind of been a mix. But when I was in Austin, it was a former Marine. The Marines came and did it, but there are a lot of things with that. The number one thing I have to say to everybody, if you have someone in your life that is a military person, you must have the DD-214 to get any of the and they don't cover everything, is what I was going to say about this. So there are benefits that come from the VA for military benefits. If you choose to be buried in a national cemetery, that cemetery plot is yours for free. That cemetery plot will also house, they'll basically stack you and your spouse if you wish. Once your spouse has passed, they will put the casket, their casket, if you're doing caskets, on top of the other casket. You can see this really well when you go to the National Cemetery in Washington, D.C., because you can go along and see all the headstones, and they have two names on the headstones. So, and usually, and in many cases, they actually put the spouse on the back side of the gravestone. So you'll have the soldier on the one side and the spouse on the other side, and they'll both be buried in the same spot.
I had my parents buried that way in military cemetery.
Yeah.
But I believe they told me at the time, if I died, I could be put in there too, up to 7 people.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I don't know if
Good
that's
thing.
still the case, but
The one thing on this, when I talked about the DD-214, when you see it, what some people don't know, this bottom part, it actually says member number 4. That is the 4th page of the DD-214, and that's the page you have to have because that's the section that sets out the type of discharge. So all of this up here tells you about his service. The bottom little section here talks about the type of discharge. They have to be honorably discharged or other than honorable, but not bad conduct discharge type of thing. The big chicken dinner. So that information is what they're going to need to see. And so it's really hard because it's not an 8.5 by 11. I've got 2 copies. I've got my front page because that's the easiest one to read, and then I got that 4th page because it has that information. And you got to have that 4th page to be able to be qualified. And this is what they're going to need for everything. If you want a military honor guard, they're going to need to see the DD-214. You want a flag, they're going to need to see the DD-214. Any of these benefits that come from the VA, this is the document that gets you those benefits. And so you got to make sure you have them and know where it's at because you got to give it to them for them to actually do it. Okay. I had one service where we had an honor guard show up. They didn't have the DD-214. I basically pulled the guy aside and said, I know this guy was a veteran. Do the damn service. And they did. So it's just one of those things. We had to actually run out and get a flag for them because they couldn't even give the flag to them because it wasn't, they didn't have a DD-214. But we did it and we made it happen. So, but so that's the biggest thing. I put in here basically the va.gov burials and memorials. That link is on there so that you can go and see. They break down everything, if it's a casket funeral, if it's an urn, cremation. Ella's grandfather was a World War II POW. They covered everything, but the casket was one of the simpler caskets that you see. It was a cloth-covered, basically wooden box. You know, it wasn't much to it, but that was all covered, and he was also buried in the National Cemetery as well. We don't have a National Cemetery on this side. Some state cemeteries will honor the veterans if they can. It's not a guarantee. But I could say I want to be buried in Washington National Cemetery, and they'd go, okay. I'd have to, or my family would have to pay to make sure my body got there. But the service itself, the burial, the grave, all of that would be covered by the VA. So if it's not a VA or National Cemetery Hospital, then it's an amount, $800 or less. There's just different amounts for different things, and so you really have to look into it. It's not 100% covered if you're not going into a national cemetery. So, okay. Questions?
I have one quick comment about the financial stuff. So like I said, my grandmother lived to be 103, and she was starting to run out of money and was going to have to go on Medicaid. And they allow Medicare, Medicaid, they allow you to go ahead and pre-buy a funeral, because before she ran out of her whole money, we went ahead and paid for a funeral. It was you know what I mean? Like she got it paid for because
It doesn't have to go towards the nursing home.
it doesn't, right, exactly. So we did it when we saw her money almost going down, paid for the funeral, and that was allowed, so you could do that.
Okay,
So.
yeah, thank you. That's good. Also, there is a Social Security benefit. It's not much again, and it's going to take a while before it comes. So when you're thinking about all these things that are going to be happening, if you're thinking, oh, I'm just going to put it into an investment account, are you going to be able to get those funds when you need them? Most funeral homes are going to work with you, and they're not going to require all the money up front and stuff like that. But It's just something to keep in mind that if you put the money aside in a CD and you can't get to it for 6 months, then you won't have it there available to use when you need it. So those are just things to kind of keep in mind and think about. So
Some counties, because for instance, I know Weld County has a benefit for some of the seniors. It's an income base that actually helps pay for for part of the, funeral expenses. So some counties, I'm sure your county's not one of them, but
I haven't heard of
some
it.
counties do that in Colorado.
Yeah.
This is something I encountered with my dad, who we divvied up at his request. So part of my dad's in the columbarium behind our church in Denver, but then I was the sister who volunteered to do all this stuff. And then I took dad to FedEx. Oh, we don't. So then I went to a couple of places, and finally I went to the post office, and there I was in line with my dad. And believe it or not, I said, will you look after this parcel for me? It's my dad. I got really choked up. I wanted him to be safe. So, but yeah.
Yeah, U.S. Post is the only one that I know that will actually transport ashes, human remains, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
They have to be specially sealed and packaged, and it does cost more. I think somewhere here, in fact, they say here, $175. Other services on page 3. $175 for shipping of cremated remains via USPS Priority Express.
Right.
So, remember when we talked about death certificates? Oh, overnight. Yeah.
That's more expensive than make them sign for it.
Like also in another service, death certificates, they listed here, $20 for the first one, $13 each for the additional. I asked them, I said, so what is your recommendation? I know we had someone here with us a couple weeks ago. She said, buy 50, 20, 10 is okay. Especially now, many of the companies are taking copies of them as legitimate. It cannot, now that's something to know, and that's something else I was going to talk about. It cannot be certified to be a true copy. In the state of Colorado, you're not allowed to certify a copy that would come from their county or the state and certify it to be a true copy. So it wouldn't be, you couldn't get it certified like that. I just finished my Notary Republic, and so that was one of the ones that they really flagged quickly. It's that anything that you can go to the county to get, you can't just make a copy of it and certify it to be a true copy.
Now, one thing, when my dad died, I had to take the original in, and they saw the original, then they made a copy, and they didn't take my extensive one.
Right, good, yeah.
I mean, they just said, as long as we see the
Right.
original and we
Yeah.
sign off, then I didn't have to leave it with them.
Nice. Yeah. Some vendors I've worked with before, if they had a public announcement, oh well, here's the obituary. I've sent companies to the obituary. Dignity Memorial is another one that does a lot. Find a Grave is another one where you can register the grave site on their site, and then it becomes a permanent listing. If I want to go find out, oh, when did my mother die, I can go to the Find a Grave, pull up her information, and see it right away. So again, these are all places that you can go to and get information that doesn't cost you, or making sure you think about how much you might need. So the funeral director that I spoke to here at Brown said he usually recommends 10 copies. Again, because so many of them are starting to accept copies, or like you said, you just show them the real thing. Yeah, I love it right there on page 3. It says caskets $1,260 to $18,000.
Must be cold and crusted.
I tell you. Well, and in South Texas, we also were required to buy a crypt. And so because of the water table and everything else, everything had to be put into a crypt. So you had another $5,000 for a cement crypt that the casket would go
They
into.
require that in Colorado. Did they change that?
I don't know for sure. I don't think they do. But
Okay,
yeah.
it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
We had to buy one for Mark.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
So again, and some of this, and the other thing I asked him about was like, well, how does it go with the cemeteries and everything else? And he said every cemetery around here is different. In fact, some of the cemeteries around here don't even have lowering equipment. So you've seen where people stay and they lower the casket in the graves. Most of the cemeteries don't like that. The funeral homes don't really care. I've seen a lot more people staying to see the casket lowered in my time since I've been a priest. It's something I never heard of or saw before. And then since I've been a priest, I've seen a lot of it, including entire family staying to be there, and even some throwing some of the dirt on top afterwards. Now, as part of the service, I always throw dirt onto the casket. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That's kind of our tradition. But they literally were like, "Where's the shovels?" And we're like, "Shovels? We're gonna bury it?" No, that's okay. We let them take care of it. The cemeteries, they're folks that do the opening and closing of the ground. They get a little picky about this because that's how they get paid. They don't want help, and they've got it down to a science. The reason for not staying for that is because it's a very mechanical. It's not gentle. Yeah, they come in. If they have the lowering equipment, the lower equipment will lower it down, but then they got to get the straps out, and they're yanking on the straps and everything else. And then they drive in a backhoe with a really big dump, and they dump a huge amount of dirt right on top. So it's not, you're not seeing the trees when the leaves and everything else. This is business. They're taking care of it. So it may not be something that you really want to stay and see. One of the things that I do as a priest is I am always the last one to leave. And so I've stood by many gravesides as they're being closed and everything else, because the last thing I want is the people to think that their loved one has been left alone when they leave. And so I always stay until the ground's closed. So that was a tradition from an old priest when I was in seminary, and I adopted it and stayed with it. So absolutely.
It just popped in my head. So
Right.
Yeah.
I want to talk.
figure how that goes. But is there a place that people have had experience with locally that does gravestones? Because we've talked about this part, but not the gravestone.
So Grand Junction, I believe, is the gravestone place. We have to send our own up to this place up in Grand Junction. So when we want the columbarium covered engraved, we have to send it up to them to have it done.
Is there one?
By the cemetery, by Orchard Mesa Cemetery, what's the name of it?
One in Delta.
Snyder, you're right.
One in Delta?
Yeah, I've seen it driven by. I've never.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, when you're driving right into Delta, once you first get in there, it's on the right-hand side, and you'll see some of the gravestones and stuff right in front of it.
Drove by there twice.
Yeah, yeah. Really, just as you're starting to get into Delta.
I think there's one in the southwestern corner that costs less. That costs less than Delta.
Yeah. So yeah, again, that engraving and gravestones and all that, that's generally your cemeteries and your funeral homes will know who are your best contacts for that. But we do, again, because we have our columbarium, we do have an engraver that we use. They know our fonts, they know all the things that we want on them or don't want on them, that sort of thing. That's really up to you, but it's still, there are some limitations. We don't want us to go out there and have just 50 million things all over the different things on every single stone. So. No, I don't know if that's.
Did we address that in our policy?
Well, maybe. No, I don't think we did. Memorial box sets. This is one of the things that it's really interesting to me. A lot of folks. Sorry. So. Well, yeah. So anyway, they have some on their website. They have a link to whoever does their box sets for them. I think they're $225. They say here that includes your guest book when people come to the service, memorial cards, thank you cards that you'd send out. So I mean, a lot of people come, and if they don't have the cemetery doing that sort of thing, they kind of get here and they go, "Oh, I guess we should have done that." And so we always had a few spare pages of guest book type loose leaf pages that we kept at the church, so that if they didn't bring a book or didn't have one provided by the cemetery, we could at least provide that so people could sign in and say they attended the service. So.
Now, the church here, if you had we just print a program for, I mean, the church would print a program.
Yes,
for it.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So programs for the funeral service itself would be something that we create here. I create them for every funeral I've ever done, honestly. Mostly because most people just don't know the funeral service, and when you have a lot of people that don't know it, they don't know what to say or do, and they feel uncomfortable. So we put the bulletin; it has all the information on it, so they can just follow right along with them on the bulletin. So anytime you have a mixed bag of folks that don't do that all the time, it's best to have a full printed bulletin so they have it in front of them. Having to try to flip between 2 and 3 books and things like that is difficult enough as it is for us to have someone that hasn't stepped foot in a church in 20 years and then have them try to follow along. So.
Now, you guys talked about, again, with my dad,
Yeah.
we picked the readings
Mhm.
that we wanted to do.
Yeah.
Some were things he had requested, some
Yeah.
were things we
Yeah.
decided.
Yeah, the first night, and I'll be happy to share you those documents, I gave all the information about the Episcopal funeral service, which included, the list of the recommended scriptures, recommended songs, recommended psalms, recommended hymns, anything like that. We have recommendations in the BCP that we always can follow along. It doesn't mean you have to use those, but I always try to provide them, and I provide the full text of them so people can see it and read it without having to think, I don't know what that scripture, that one line about that scripture doesn't give me the whole thing, so they don't really know. That's usually the short list you get, is just to give you the kind of the quick and dirty of what that scripture is about. But for most folks, it's better to be able to read the whole thing. So, and then we also talk about that you can have as many or as few as you want. So generally we follow the same service: Old Testament, New Testament, Gospel, Psalm or 2 in there. Just kind of depends on what you want. Eucharist, whether you want to have a Eucharist with the service or not. So yeah, the choices are all there, and we definitely are open to all of them. So. Like I said, some cases we won't play the crazy rock and roll music at the end of the service, but we may play it out here in the parish hall afterward and let people enjoy the music and the video or whatever else they're wanting to do as they're kind of going through that. So,
We had a piece of music written for my dad,
Mhm.
for his 70th birthday.
Mhm, mhm.
And they did play that. We brought a clarinetist in.
Oh wow,
and they
nice,
played it
nice,
during
very
the
good.
service. It
Yeah.
was very nice.
Yeah. I'm pretty open. There's just been a few things that people have come to me with, and I'm just like, yeah, why don't you hold that for the reception? Take this job and shove it, or we're. There's just been some things that people have brought to me. I'm going, well, that's wonderful. Play it at the reception. So, yeah, if it's respectful, and I've been, it's no problem. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So,
There was no heavy metal.
yeah. Yeah.
No gangster rap.
Yeah, gangster rap. Yeah.
No games.
Let's see. Okay, real good. So we have finally voted and approved. We have decided that our columbarium, basically, it was all set up and done a long time ago, and some of it was kind of lost, and we kind of reevaluate everything. We have a new policy that's going to be coming out with that now. We've lowered the price for the columbarium space to $500. Okay. That does not include the engraving of the lid. Okay, so just to know, that's also going to have to be paid for. We're trying to get a settled price, but that price is always open to change. So we'll pre-buy what we used to do, and what we're still kind of saying is you're prepaying for the columbarium niche. The other would be best to be paid for when it happens to be carved. But we can work on that and kind of get some areas to kind of help with that as well. 2 people. So we have been beating ourselves up and down. This is the size of our columbarium. It is 11 inches tall, deep if you will, 11 inches deep, 9 inches wide, and it is round, just like this. Okay? So if you think you're going to get that box in our columbarium, it ain't going to happen. There's no way that I can put it in here. It's not going to work. This would definitely, it would hold most of the urns that I saw listed on their website on Brown's would fit in here. You got to know the measurements though. 11 inches tall, and it ain't going any further.
Yeah.
If you get a square, well, we can't change the shape. So you got to make sure that the square will still fit within the 9-inch width. But your corners are not going to be 9 inches, right? So be very careful if you're thinking about square.
that you could use a large margarine
Oh,
tub.
I think, yeah.
What?
A Ziploc
A
bag.
Ziploc bag.
Well, that's what they pretty much come in when they're cremated anyway. So, yeah. So yes, the plastic box with the bag in it would fit in here, no problem. 2 would fit in here, no problem. But if you had an urn, you probably wouldn't be able to get the second one in there unless you put them in ashes, just the ashes, that sort of thing. So yes, our niches will accommodate 2. Our policy is going to be written so that it tells what we will and won't do later on. So, for example, if someone decides they don't want we're not going to exhume the ashes. I'm sorry. Once you're putting them in there, they're in there. Once, it's like any other grave. You cover it, you can exhume, but it's really not the ideal thing to do. Okay. If you've purchased it and then later on decide, you know what, we move, we want to go somewhere else, we have written into the policy that we will refund that money back. As long as it hasn't been filled yet. Again, as long as it's not been filled with, not even if it's one person, we end up having the second person later on. We don't want to disturb the grave, right? We don't really want to disturb it. We just take the top off, put the other one in there, and close it back up. Okay. The one other piece that we're still working on with policy is what happens if the church was to close. So in Texas, the diocese there had it written into the rule that any church that had a columbarium, if that church was closed, because it would be the diocese that would be closing it, they would then take care of that. And the choices would be you could retrieve the ashes of your loved one to be moved to another location, or the diocese would take care of having it relocated to another location, to another crypt somewhere. So I think in the original policy it says how did it say? It was almost like we'll throw it away. No, they were just like said we'll dispose of the ashes, and it was just like, no, we're not disposing of anything. We will ceremoniously rebury the ashes if that's what's necessary. Hopefully that never comes, but just know that your loved ones are still going to be taken care of if in case the church was to actually close. No, because the money's already been spent. Yeah. So yeah, part of why our fee is so low, and I do ask you, please shop it around. I guarantee you, they charge you just as much to open a hole in the ground for an urn in a box this big as they do for a casket. And so it's going to cost you the same amount if you're out in the cemetery trying to bury ashes.
I think it was the deed to your plot is 200 and the excavation is 300. So it basically is the same.
About the same amount. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I purchased a plot ages ago because my mom and dad are in that place in Denver. And they said to me after my father died, after Mom, oh, the ground has shifted. I'm sorry to say you won't be on top of them. You're going to be way over there.
Oh, wow.
Thanks. But no, it did. Something shifted, and they don't want to disturb that. It's supposed to be 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Now I'm in left field.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah. When we were in Texas, when one of my grandfathers passed, so this is a weird, funny story kind of, but my grandmother was married 3 times. She buried all 3 of her husbands. Okay, so we don't think Black Widow. They just go. But we did. But as we discovered, her 3rd husband had also had 2 previous wives who had both also passed away. So both of them were on their 3rd, and we were placing bets of who was going to win. My grandmother won. Okay. So, but my second grandfather, my grandfather, who I really knew, wanted to be buried on his property that they had in Middle Texas, Center Texas. And so we went through the process, and it was a process. You have to get it declared by the county. You have to do all the things. You have to map it out. It has to be fenced off. And at that moment, it is now a public property. So now, if somebody else found out that there was a cemetery there and wanted to be buried, we could not say no because it becomes a public cemetery. We could charge them, but we couldn't say no. So he's the lone person up there for now. But that's just, there are many different things that can and do happen with funerals. It really is dependent on the state and county and city and all kinds of other stuff. But those are things that if you're wanting something different, just think, you have to explore a little bit. It's not going to be instantaneous. So.
Lorraine, when you said that you know some people, it reminds me of one of my absolute favorite plays is Our Town. Isn't that what it is?
Oh,
Our
yeah,
Our
Mr.
Town.
and Mrs. Antrobus.
Yes, exactly. About it's taking place in the cemetery. Do you guys know that play?
Yeah.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
good. By Thornton Wilder, wasn't it?
Yes.
Thornton Wilder.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was thinking about you knowing people. You might not be on top, but you know some people.
An earlier one, you talked about
Yeah.
ashes are a little more
Yeah.
control, and I mean, a big thing a number of years ago
Right.
is they'd load ashes in shotgun shells.
He's a hunter.
And so,
Oh,
you'd be like, well, do you want your ashes distributed
Yeah.
around the Platte River?
Yeah.
Because I hunt on the Platte River, so you're
Yeah.
dumping ashes into a waterway. But I don't, I haven't heard anything about the shotgun shells.
Yeah.
It's kind of a range
Yeah.
for
I
a
was
little while.
hoping to be able to.
It's a fire them off. You're done. Love
I
it.
think we'll look at it differently.
Yeah. One of the so on the front, I did list Brown's website, browncremationservice.com. They also have links to their vendor of choice for caskets, their vendor of choice for urns, their vendor of choice for what we're talking about, kind of things that you can do with ashes and that sort of thing. Now they'll make medallions, they'll make diamonds out of ashes. A lot of things I've seen now, they're putting like fingerprints on gold. So you can have their final fingerprint kind of put on a piece of gold, like a jewelry piece or a band or something like that. So there's all kinds of memorial things that they have available. They're just going to cost you. So there's different things, though. That there are a lot of different options available out there for you. And you see it. I've seen a lot of them. And like I said, some families like to just take some piece of ash. The one that surprised me the most, and I've only had it happen like once or twice now, is the family wrote letters to their loved one and put them into the urn before we put them into the columbarium. I'd never seen that before.
I did that for my mother.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and if you have, and again, I'll say this, I think I said it once before, it says, if you have dad sitting aside waiting until mom passes away and you want to have their ashes put together, or maybe one wasn't being cremated, do not let the funeral home, or especially the cemetery, see you put them in the bottom of the casket. Because they're not supposed to bury the two together, because the cemetery doesn't get their plot. Okay, so again, this is one of those things that sometimes you turn, that casket was opened, was it okay? And you turn around, they do their thing, and you close it. No. I mentioned how I had a family disappear on me one time after a funeral, and I was like, where the heck did they go? And I went around the back of the church and found they had spread the ashes out behind the back of the church. Well, they snuck off to do it, and they were hiding, and I was like, you didn't have to hide. We're fine with that, Please, go right ahead. That doesn't bother us at all. No worries.
In Nebraska, people they're not as good anymore, but Huskers, the football team, and the stadium said you cannot do ashes. Do you know how many people I've heard that said that they had them in their pockets and they sprinkle as they were going up and down the stairs? So there's been cremations put in the Husker stadium.
Yeah.
Not a big wall.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I mean, I just get curious, like if you live to an old person, you never have to go to a facility, have home health care and all that, and you're getting to the end of your life, can you have people come in your house and help you, be hospice and go out to the world like in the old days when you used to die at home? Because if you're able to stay at home your life, I think that's kind of more meaningful than just dying in some bed in a hospital.
Well, true.
Home health care is always.
I think it was at home. Yeah. Oh, okay, because I watch a lot of old-fashioned TV where you used to when the loved ones would die at home. And
Most people would like that.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if it was hospice.
And a few
Yeah.
years before he died, he complained about my mom singing. So there you go. It was great,
Yeah, my mother passed at home. She was in a nursing home 2 weeks before she died, and she was she did everything she could. She says, I want to go home, I want to go home, I want to go home. And she did. And 2 weeks later, she passed. So she went home to go home. So it's definitely something that many, many people do. And we know Tom and Carolyn. Carolyn stayed at home. He took care of it.
So about a year ago, when we were going through this with my mom in Crippen, which, as you said, now it's owned by somebody else. But one of the things they asked was about getting fingerprinted. And there was no charge for them to scan the fingerprints, and then they would have them if somebody wanted them printed on something later on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's nice to
I
know.
don't know that I ever brought it up. But I said, okay, yeah, you can go ahead and
Yeah.
scan them. Who knows? Who knows when you might want them.
Yeah, it's funny. The county over here just getting their digital fingerprinting thing going, and it was like, but it doesn't submit it automatically. But they have them. They can store them and do all that stuff. So. They're trying to get them so when they process and send things to the state. So it's just so the sheriff's department doing their thing. So,
Background check.
they do the So hopefully they'll be without the ink now and be able to just do it without all that. So yes, ma'am.
My first husband died 15 years ago in northern Indiana, and our church at the time had a brick fascia, and they had this for people who passed and wanted to have it was like a thin piece of brick, but
Veneer.
over the brick.
Yeah.
That had the name and birth, death, year, but not all that. There wasn't enough room for all of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I bought a brick that will be beside him and his brick, and then part of my ashes will go with his wherever he's thinking he'd like his in there.
All Creek.
Like I said,
Only $100.
there you go. One of my churches I was at, they had a memorial garden, and they had a stone pathway that went out to the memorial garden, and those were bricks that you could buy and have loved ones' names memorialized on them as well. So absolutely. Yeah, there are tons of things.
You do want to make sure that you understand what the policies are for those.
Yes.
Because my mom is in England on a memorial plaque. My brother and I had a memorial plaque made for her. But if we stop paying, they take that memorial plaque up.
Oh, wow.
It's
not a one-time deal.
Amazing. Man, we could raise some money.
Chunks at a time.
Yeah, wow.
So,
Interesting.
so
You're right. Policies
I
are
had no clue.
right. Yeah.
I just assumed once we did it, we were done.
Yeah. I honestly have never heard that before, but that's interesting. Yeah. Take care of each other. Yeah.
So our columbarium policy is now $500 a year. Let's change that, Mark.
Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. Was there any other questions? Anything else right now? You've been bringing this for weeks, and I want to talk about it for a second. He has brought this book with him for several weeks, and it is talking about downsizing and how, as part of what we should be doing to help our families, is to make sure we get rid of all that junk that we don't need them to have to deal with, right? So he's stuff. Yes.
Not only talks about you, but it talks about how to handle someone that's having a problem with it. And it helps you evaluate what you should get rid of and how to handle with your children. It's everybody I've ever given that book to has come back personally and thanked me. So it's a very good book. I highly recommend it.
Absolutely.
One of the most
I'll send the ISBN
a very
with them.
popular book at our bookshop was Swedish death cleaning. And there's now a TV show about it, and I don't know what service it's on now.
Yeah.
But people have been, it's a very, we sold it for the 5 years, but people said, oh, there's a TV show now. I started selling more. But that's the same thought. You need to do this for your family.
Yeah.
You need to downsize it for your family.
My aunt gave me one. Is it about?
Yeah, it's not a very big book.
Yeah.
And But earlier than that, I run across something on the radio that was talking about Swedish death thing, and then my aunt sent me a copy of the book.
So my daughter's father-in-law just passed away. And it literally just, I know, it's not been a good couple of years, or a good couple of months. Anyway, they literally, and I say this because I want everybody to think about this, what you leave for somebody behind. They literally have spent a month cleaning out, it's a rental that they lived in. A month cleaning it out. Constant work. And it's been horrendous for them. It's just been horrendous. And it's just,
Come to our garage, we're still dealing with my mother.
It's just, I just think it's respectful of us as parents or whomever, elders, that we don't leave that for our kids. It's just not, it's not nice. We don't like the F word, but it's not fair.
The other thing, there's things that, like I had a lot of tools, I used to do a lot of maintenance. I found people can use them. I feel good doing it too. But my son don't, he don't do those kind of things. So, so if you find somebody who could use your clothes or tools or whatever.
Down south.
You can give the stuff to the woman's rummage sale.
Down in South Texas, the estate sales were like the thing. Everywhere you turned around, there was a sale. In fact, the Young Life group used to be one that would come in and run estate sales as a way to raise money for themselves and their group. And so you'd come around the corner and say, "Oh, Young Life estate sale." Oh, okay. And it was literally, you walked into their home and, it was all their stuff. And the families were there and they were just take it. It was like practical. What do you want for this? $5. Will you take 2? Yes, take it, please. Get it. You take a quarter? Yes, please, take it. Okay. Yeah. So.
Also, I think my mother is still alive. So, she didn't have a hoarded house, but they were married 65 years, and she could have cleaned out a lot of it. I mean, so forth. I know that I never want my daughter to have some of the feelings that I'm having towards my mom now, and how it has consumed my life to deal with her stuff. And I got all teary-eyed in the car today when I was talking to Brian about it. I said, I don't like being angry with mom for leaving me with this. And so think about that cleaning out is also going to make your family have better feelings about you at the end, because some people, it's just a lot. It is so much, and it's consumed me for a year now, so.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Okay. That's what happened tonight. Thank you all again for joining us. Next week, Hope West Hospice will be with us next week. Hope West Hospice with us next week. Yeah.